Welcome to Framework Fortune. I'm your host Ben, and welcome back everybody in the Framework Fortune community. We're starting a new series here on the channel, the study of cycles. If you've been following me, you've heard me mention cycles quite a bit in the live streams, in debates with people, all of that. So if you're new to the channel, want to learn more about this, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. But let's not waste any time and dive in. So why are we studying cycles? And what cycles are we exactly talking about? Cycles in general are found throughout everything, all throughout nature especially. Think about precipitation. It rains, it evaporates, goes back to the clouds, rains again. So that is a cycle. Most people learn that in school. Pretty basic cycle. But we want to focus on the cycles that have to do with economics and history, so we can strategize and maximize our wealth building. If you're not using the cycles to your advantage, you're building your wealth almost blind. And I'll show you what I mean throughout this series. So the first cycle we're going to start with is one of the easier ones to understand, and one that you're going to need to know as we move forward with the series, and that is supply and demand. Let's say you've got these three Twizzlers, or 3 pieces of bacon, whatever you want to call them. That's your supply. That's why we're drawing an undersupply. So 3 pieces of bacon, and you have one person who is hungry for 1 piece of bacon. That is your demand, that is your supply. That person is not going to have to pay a high price if he only wants 1 piece of bacon, because you have 3 pieces of bacon. You have plenty of supply with less demand. So if you want to continue to sell your bacon and you're not getting any demand, you'll have to lower your prices until you get to a point where you have demand for your bacon. So more supply than demand will lead to price decreases. On the vice versa side, let's say you just have 1 piece of bacon here and you've got tons of hungry people. Well, now these tons of hungry people want your 1 piece of bacon. They're going to have to compete against each other and decide which one of them wants to buy this piece of bacon the most. So just like at an auction, when you have an item up there and you see people raising their hands and bidding for that one item, the price always gets pushed up. The same type of thing would happen here. These 3 would have to debate who wants to pay the highest price for the bacon to get it. So when you have low supply and high demand, the price of the item goes up. And when you have enough supply with equal demand, then you have no imbalance. And imbalance is a very important thing to realize when we're talking about cycles. So of course cycles are circles. This would be your supply and demand cycle. So when studying cycles and drawing the cycles out so you can understand them visually, you want to put 1/2 of the cycle on one side and the other half of the cycle on the other side. Because when we're at equal, we are in balance. We are making a perfect cycle, a perfect circle. I know this is not a perfect circle. You can trash me in the comments about it if you would like. When we're looking at it as a cycle, of course, the supply is going to be going to the demand, right? If you've got products, those are going to go to the buyers. Well, then the buyer's money is going to go to the suppliers. So that makes the circle. And this is a natural cycle and a natural part of free market economics. When we get these supply shortages like we're having now, that is because the cycle is becoming unbalanced. So instead, if the supply, say from lockdowns from China, is blocked and stops right here, well, the supply never reaches the demand side, so the demand side is going to grow and grow and grow because there's no supply, which of course is going to push the prices up higher. And when that happens, this is no longer a cycle, right? The cycle is broken. And that's when you get those price fluctuations. Outside interference interferes with the natural cycle of things. But the cycle of supply and demand is not just limited to suppliers and buyers. Instead, you can find it throughout all of nature. One example I always use, instead of the bacon versus people reference, we could change this easily to antelopes versus lions. Right? So if you've got 3 antelopes and 3 lions, then the supply and demand cycle is fine. But if you were to take out these 2 antelopes and only have 1 antelope there with 3 lions, well, what's going to happen? These lions are going to fight against each other to try to get that antelope first. It's going to cost them in blood and sweat and all that energy exertion from fighting with each other and possibly their lives. So that is a very, very high demand when an animal is willing to put its life on the line for its food. So supply and demand is not just a human concept. It exists outside of humans. But back to the economic side, we can use the same cycle when we're talking about the labor force. Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve have been talking about how tight the labor force is. So instead of bacon or antelopes, we're going to change this to jobs. So these squares here are now jobs. And of course, these are your people. These are your labor force. So when we've got enough jobs to fit enough people, we have a nice balance of supply and demand in the labor force. When there are not enough jobs, say there's only 1 job and 3 people, well, the demand for that job is going to go up, and these people are going to have to compete for it. And the 2 that don't get the job may not be able to get another job if there's that big of a job shortage. So in this case, the supply is jobs going to the demand for jobs by people, and then those people take those jobs. So it's important to have a nice balance of jobs along with the population. You'll get a nice supply and demand cycle. But you throw in something like the pandemic that cut out all those jobs, the supply of jobs stops there. So there's no supply of jobs going to the people. The demand grows more and more, and we have an imbalance, making it no longer a cycle for the time being. And with people demanding jobs and there being no supply, well, people are going to get desperate, right? Just like those lions, if there's only 1 antelope and 3 lions, those lions are going to be desperate to get that 1 job. So you're going to have tons of people trying to compete against each other, which makes it even harder to get a job if the supply is low. The pandemic did not actually stop jobs. Governments are the ones who did the lockdowns, and governments most of the time ruin these cycles, and that causes tons of problems. That's something I'll be constantly showing proof of, as well as examples as we continue with this study of cycles. Of course, if you've got everybody competing for jobs and there's not that many jobs, there's not that big of a supply, the suppliers of jobs can pay less, right? Because there's not many jobs out at the moment. So with people getting desperate, the ones who are getting the jobs are going to get paid less. Now, let's say you've got plenty of jobs. The jobs are flowing nicely through the cycle to the demand, but then you have the government sending out stimmy checks. So those stimmy checks cut off demand for jobs. That interference from the government, those stimmy checks right here, ruin the cycle. Then when you have a shortage of workers and plenty of jobs, well, those suppliers of jobs are going to have to pay higher prices to make it more appealing to get that demand back up for the supply, which is what we've been seeing over the past few years, where people did not want to work either because of the stimulus checks and all the money they were receiving from the government, or because they were scared to go out and get a job and work during a pandemic. Whatever the case may be, that caused wages to rise faster. But this is not natural and is not a part of the cycle. If you take the government interference out from this, and it starts when we're talking about the U.S. government, we got to talk about all of history. The cycle has been broken because of something called minimum wage. Minimum wage forces these suppliers to always pay a base rate. We'll get into inflation more, but if the government, the Federal Reserve, has caused inflation by adding more currency to the currency supply, then that minimum wage that they have to pay is not actually accurate. Because if that minimum wage was started 50, 60 years ago when inflation was 2% and now it's at 10%, then that minimum wage actually is doing absolutely nothing except for messing up the natural cycle. So these cycles, governments and people love to mess with economic cycles, and when they do, when you get these outside influences like that, it ruins the natural cycle of things. The markets, left alone to do what they will do, will continue in a natural cycle. Now something natural happens, say a hurricane in an area where a lot of jobs are at, and all those jobs get wiped out. That is something natural happening to the cycle. That is something in nature. It's not human interference. Eventually, even if you do get a pause right here, the weather is going to go back to normal and that area will get back to work and it will work itself out. There may be a pause in the cycle, but it's not a direct interference like minimum wage or any other type of policies that are 50 years old, 100 years old, that we're still following. When so much has changed, you just get a crazy old nasty mess going on, which is what has led up to where we are now. Part of the chaos, part of the bad economy, the stock market crashing, all of that is because of interference into these natural cycles, especially supply and demand. So next lesson we'll be talking about the cycle of centralization and decentralization, and by looking at that cycle we can analyze and get an idea where our country is going in these next couple of years. If you're learning stuff, be sure to hit that like button and join us for the rest of the Study of Cycles series that will be going on throughout the year until I'm finished up with it. Appreciate everybody joining me as always. Stay safe out there. Till next time.
This is war with the enemy. Think that it was meant to be. Living in a time where disease is on every screen. I won't let them fester me. I know most are festering. Negativity